All right. I think we'll get started now. This is our webinar on bullying. I'm Caitlin McAndrews. I am a partner here at McAndrews Law Offices. I work primarily out of our Delaware and DC metro area offices, and I'm joined by Rachel Rosenberg.
Hey everyone, my name is Rachel. I'm also an attorney here at McAndrews Law Offices. I am located in Philadelphia, but I work on cases in Delaware, and also in Pennsylvania.
And we're so excited to talk with you tonight about this important topic. So we are going to just jump right in. So first of all, to define the problem, bullying is, I'm actually going to skip over these first couple slides and hit the definition of bullying. Bullying is, or how we're defining it tonight, is a negative act or interaction among children that are carried out repeatedly over time. It typically involves some sort of an imbalance of power, with the more powerful child or group attacking those who are less powerful. And that definition is actually taken from the U.S. Department of Justice, and I think is a good one for framing our discussion. I think it's important to remember that the imbalance of power can be real or perceived, and that it can be along a lot of different lines. So a lot of our discussion today is going to focus on disability, but there are other aspects of bullying, and we'll touch on those as well. So just to hit on a few examples of what bullying can look like, there's obviously physical bullying. I think this is what we think of kind of in a more old-fashioned sense of the word, like playground fights, hitting a kid, hitting somebody else, kicking under the table, physical intimidation. There's also verbal bullying, which includes name calling and especially using slurs or excessive teasing, sexually suggestive remarks. And then there's indirect bullying, exclusion from social groups, telling rumors about somebody, sending abusive mail. And I know this probably isn't as common anymore, but like signing people up for junk mail was a form of bullying at one point in time. And then we get kind of the newest form of bullying, which is cyberbullying. And that's any type of bullying that's carried out by an electronic medium. So it can include text messages, social media, pictures and video clips, taking a photo of somebody doing something embarrassing in school, or a photo that's taken out of context and circulating it, emailing, chat room and instant messaging, if your kid is using that, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, websites. So any form of electronic bullying is considered cyberbullying.
Bullying can have a variety of effects on your kids, whether they are experiencing bullying as the victim or if they are engaging in bullying activities. So bullying can have long-term and short-term psychological effects on, like I said, both those who are being bullied and those who bully. And sometimes those effects can last into adulthood. Victims experienced loneliness and reported having trouble making social and emotional adjustments, difficulty making friends, and poor relationships with classmates. And that comes from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. Victims of bullying often suffer from humiliation, insecurity, loss of self-esteem, and may develop a fear of going to the school. And as you could easily imagine, any of these effects could lead to other impacts at school as well. The ability to receive an education at all, all of that, everything emotional is related to that as well. And those who bully and are bullied appear to be at the greatest risk of experiencing loneliness, trouble making friends, lack of success in school, like I just said, problem behaviors like smoking and drinking, and are at a greater risk of suffering from depression and other mental health problems.
And I'm really glad, Rachel, that you just framed it as those who bully and are bullied, because I think something that we see a lot and something that we're going to talk about later in this presentation is the transition from a victim of bullying into being a bully oneself. Unfortunately, it's a fact pattern that I've seen many times where a student's record will show instances of being a victim of bullying by other students, and then something flips and that student then goes on to have disciplinary incidents on their record for bullying other students. So it's something important to keep in mind because both the bully and the victim of bullying are at risk for all of those things that you just said. So we're going to be talking about some of the legal implications of bullying today, and then move into discussing some practical suggestions for how to address bullying. And the major laws that we're going to hit on are the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and then the ADA and a few other areas of law that may be implicated by bullying, with the most focus being spent on the IDEA and Section 504. As many of you already know, we focus our practices on representing students with disabilities in schools, and those are the two laws that protect those students and that afford them with a number of rights. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on. So to start, we'll touch on the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The latest version of it is from 2004, but it actually goes back way longer than that and had an earlier name called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And the IDEA has required for all this time that children receive a free and appropriate public education in their least restrictive environment. And bullying can interfere with that right because it, as Rachel was saying, it interferes with their ability to receive an education. So there are actually some remedies under IDEA for bullying and harassment because it can rise to this denial of a free, appropriate public education. It can make it so that a student is maybe school avoidant. They don't want to come to school because they have been bullied. It can make it so that they are distracted in class, and so they're not available for their learning and not hearing and understanding what's happening in class. It can mean that they are not gaining the social skills that they need because they are not interacting in a positive way with their peers. So for all those reasons and more, bullying denies a student with a disability their right to a free, appropriate public education. And one of the main remedies for that is compensatory education. It's access to funds that a family can use to pay for additional educational services for their child. And what that looks like differs from case to case, but it can sometimes include private school tuition or money for tutoring or money for summer programming, money for social skills groups that the student can participate in, or therapies like with a counselor or a psychologist, or even a speech language pathologist or occupational therapist. So compensatory education can be a very powerful remedy for a student victim of bullying. My slide isn't advancing. There we go. Another potential remedy for bullying under the IDEA is an order for development of an appropriate IEP. And that IEP might need to include social skills to help the bullied student self-advocate. It might include training for the teachers and staff to identify and proactively prevent bullying. So those are elements that might be included in an appropriate IEP to help serve a student. And then sometimes parents will choose to unilaterally place their child into a private school when the student is bullied and the family does not feel that they are safe and appropriately learning in their public school. And in those cases, sometimes tuition reimbursement can be available for those parents if they've proceeded in to meet the steps that the IDEA sets out for such cases. And the prior slide just had some facts about a tuition reimbursement case, but we're going to move ahead to talking about Section 504 now.
So in addition to the IDEA Act, which Caitlin just described, there are other federal laws that require school districts to accommodate for students with disabilities, including accommodations that relate to potential bullying. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is a federal law that prohibits discrimination against students with disabilities. And that includes harassment related to disabilities. So in order to plead a violation, a plaintiff under section 504, a plaintiff must demonstrate that he or she or they has a disability, is otherwise qualified for the benefit denied, been denied the benefits solely by the reason of the disability, and the benefit is part of a program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So a public school qualifies or is pursuant to this because public schools receive federal funding assistance. So they are required to provide to protect students who have disabilities from discrimination. So if a student is being discriminated on the basis of disability, then the school has a responsibility to intervene and to combat that. And if they don't, then you, as a parent or as a student, potentially have an ability to plead a violation under section 504. Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, is another federal law that provides similar protections. So these are civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination against individuals with disabilities, ensures that the children with disability have equal access to education. So like we said earlier, when describing all the different effects that bullying can have, bullying can really affect a student's education and their ability to receive that education. So public schools are required to combat that.
And just one other thing that I like to mention with section 504 in the ADA, and that is that if a student is regarded as having a disability, that can qualify them as well. So like, for example, I've represented students who have very real social skills deficits and have had other peers make fun of them for what they consider having autism. And they'll say, oh, you have autism, in a pejorative way. Even if that student is not diagnosed with autism, that could be disability-based discrimination under Title II and or Section 504. So I think that's important to remember. And just to kind of distinguish these laws that prohibit discrimination from what I was saying about the IDEA, the IDEA gives affirmative rights. So it entitles a student to a free, appropriate public education, whereas 504 and the ADA are more focused on prohibiting discrimination. Both of them are often implicated in these, all of these laws are often implicated in bullying situations. But we're always on the lookout for what potential rights of the student are being violated. Would you agree with that, Rachel?
Yeah, I think that was a really helpful distinction.
Okay.
And then quickly
sorry. Do you want me to stay on that slide?
Yeah, for a second. Just to plead, like I explained with section 504, to plead a violation under the ADA, you also have to show that the student has a disability, is a qualified individual, and has suffered an adverse action because of that disability. So there's some other federal laws that can be implicated in bullying cases as well. Won't go into a ton of detail about them, but one of them is Title IX of the Education Amendments. So Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, including harassment and bullying, in schools that receive federal funding. Public schools, school districts are included in that. So school districts might violate Title IX when sex-based harassment is so bad that it creates a hostile environment for the student. And that is either encouraged or tolerated or ignored by the school. A school must act to combat this type of behavior. So similarly, Title IV of the Civil Rights Act is similar, but it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race. So like I just explained with regard to discrimination on the basis of sex, schools also must act to combat discrimination on the basis of race. And of course, both discriminating on the basis of sex and the basis of race can be heavily implicated in bullying matters. So it's definitely relevant when thinking about how schools are supposed to and need to protect students from bullying, how they should act, and how we can think about what rights students have with regard to all of this.
And another interesting and difficult consideration is when some of these issues intersect. So when a student with a disability sexually harasses another student with a disability, right? So we've got the issue of both the bully and the victim having disabilities. We have sexual harassment, which implicates Title IX. Maybe there's also a racial implication, which implicates Title VI. And taking into consideration all of those elements, the discipline protections of the bully as a student with a disability, maybe their lack of understanding of the nature of their actions, are all things that we have to navigate. And we'll talk about that a little more as we go through, but I just wanted to flag that as an issue that, we're always on the lookout for.
So Delaware, so we just talked about some federal laws that apply across the country. Delaware in particular has adopted legislation requiring school districts to address bullying. So the Delaware Bullying Prevention Law, Title 14, Delaware Code, Section 4112D, is that legislation. And it provides that schools must prohibit bullying and retaliation against those who report bullying. This legislation defines bullying, it requires school districts to establish a policy that defines bullying, have a written statement preventing bullying, and adopt a school-wide bully prevention program.
I really like this next quote. We are all either bullies, bullied, or bystanders, because I think it accentuates the role that all of us play in preventing bullying and addressing it when it does occur. So now we're going to talk for a few moments about special needs students as bullies. But before I do, I just want to answer a couple of questions that have come in. So one was whether a student with an IEP definitely has a disability because they've qualified for the IEP. And that is true. That is accurate. So if a student has an IEP, they've met one of the IDEA eligibility categories, which requires both that they have one of the list of disabilities and that it impacts their education. So they are obviously eligible for an IEP, but they're also eligible for protections under Section 504 and the ADA, even if they don't have a 504 plan. And the other is whether the slides will be made available to those who join. I am happy to make the slides available. I think we do just need to get folks' email addresses. So if you do want a copy of the slides, if you can just throw your email address in the Q&A, we will try to make sure we can get those to you. So talking about bullies when the perpetrator is a student with a disability. So this slide emphasizes how students students who bully come from every type of background, every race, income level, family situation, gender, religion. However, there are fairly common traits, certain common traits to be on the lookout for a student who is just more at risk of becoming a bully. So they may be students who tend to be frustrated and anxious, who come from families where their parents or siblings bully, because we have to remember bullying is a learned behavior. They find themselves trying to fit in with a peer group that encourages bullying, and so there's some peer pressure there. They have parents who struggle with behavior management themselves, with setting limits, who maybe have inconsistent discipline. So they could have really strong disciplinary responses sometimes, and then very lax disciplinary responses other times. That type of inconsistency can make a child more susceptible to becoming a bully. Or students who are not as well supervised can be more susceptible to becoming bullies. Other common traits are students who are quick to blame others and unwilling to accept responsibility for their actions. I will totally admit to having some of those children myself. But again, it's a learned behavior, right? So that is something that we have to teach our students and be particularly on the lookout for this skill to learn, because it's a skill to learn to take responsibility. Students who struggle with empathy, who struggle with thinking about how someone else is feeling, and showing understanding for others' feelings can be more likely to become a bully. So again, that's a learned skill that we can work on with those students. This is one that I think I've harped on tonight, but students who are bullied themselves are more likely to become bullies, especially when they are bullied without assistance or without adults stepping in, because then they're learning that this is something that other students are getting away with. And again, as a learned behavior, they then assume that behavior themselves. Another trait is that they may have less developed social and interpersonal skills, or be seeking control. They're looking for ways to take control. So those are all kind of traits to be on the lookout for. And as an attorney advocate for students with disabilities, if I see those traits in a student, I am just a little bit more mindful that those are skills that we want to make sure that we teach the student so that it doesn't turn to a point of a behavior issue. You know what? I thought that I advanced the slide and I didn't. And Rachel, I forget, is this my slide or yours?
I think it's yours, but
okay, I'm happy to do it. Yeah. Thanks for setting me straight.
No
so so helping children who bully, right? Like we just said, it's a learned behavior and it can be unlearned. So teaching those skills that we just highlighted as common traits for students who bully is a really good way to help untangle the issue that is bullying. One thing that we talk about as special education attorneys and advocates and parents is understanding the function of the student's behavior. And many of you may have undergone functional behavioral assessments with your children to better understand why they are engaging in the behavior that they do. Bullying is a behavior just like any other. So a lot of those traits that we just looked at can actually be functions that lead to the bullying, that seeking control, that misunderstanding social cues, lack of understanding other people's emotions, and poor conflict resolution skills, learning bullying as a conflict resolution skill. All of those can be things that we work on with students and teach them. And there are programs that we have for a lot of those skills that we can work into that student's IEP or 504 plan if they are already identified as needing one of those plans. And then remembering that bullying hurts everyone. So not just the bully and the victim, the students that observe it, it can put them on guard or make them more anxious. It can teach them that bullying is tolerated and we don't want that to happen. It can make the school learning environment a negative work environment for teachers and administrators. And it takes a huge toll on parents who are, trying to either manage and set limits for their child who is engaging in bullying or empathize with their child who's the victim of bullying. And because it's such an endemic problem, we all need to bear responsibility for addressing the behavior.
So first of all, apologies if you heard my dog barking. I tried to mute it as quickly as possible. And apologies in advance if he starts again. He seems to be on alert for noises at the moment. But anyway, so one of the best ways to address bullying at school is through trying to address it in an IEP. And there are a lot of different accommodations and services and supports that can be put in place to address bullying. These we're going to go through some examples, and we have a bunch listed here that I'll go through more quickly, and then we're going to go into more detail about a lot of them later on in the presentation. But if you're seeing bullying and if the school hasn't addressed it with you yet, you can bring it to the school and say, I want to have an IEP meeting and see what you can do to address it through the IEP. So some different ways that are legally appropriate to address bullying through an IEP are to provide a classroom aid to monitor bullying, to provide social skills training, to learn ways to prevent or avoid bullying, to provide self-advocacy training, and we'll talk in more detail about what that looks like later on, To provide daily homeschool notebooks where a child discusses the school day with a trusted adult at the end of the day. To provide class-wide training to foster a proper culture of respect. This could be helpful if there's been a lot of bullying in a given class, and a lot of students or teachers might need this kind of training. Some other ways to address bullying in the IEP are to create a circle of friends with peers, to provide counseling by the school psychologist or guidance counselor or social worker. That could be helpful both for a victim of bullying and somebody who is bullying. To provide physical separation from the bully. If two students are in a classroom together, and there's a bullying relationship there, sometimes the best thing to do is to split them up and put the student into another classroom. Teacher training. Again, teachers could receive training not only on how to handle bullying when they see it in their classroom, how to work on preventing bullying. Maybe if teachers are engaging in bullying, there needs to be training there so that they're not engaging in that type of behavior. Also, an IEP can offer services to the bully's family, such as counseling, family training. As Caitlin mentioned earlier, some of this can be reflected at home. Social skills programming, and evaluation for specialized services, such as receiving, like Caitlin mentioned, a functional behavioral assessment.
And just to jump in and add a note on the physical separation aspect that Rachel mentioned, one thing that we hear a lot is when schools will have told the family, we can't move the bully because he is also a student with a disability. The bullying is related to that disability, and therefore we cannot change his placement. And while that may be true that that student might have disciplinary protections as a student with disability that prevent the school system from changing the placement of that student, placement is actually a legal term of art in the IDEA, and it means a certain level of services. So that student can actually be moved to a different classroom as long as the level of service that they're receiving is still the same. So they can't be moved from a full-time general education environment to a full-time special education class. However, if they are in, for example, a special education class that provides a certain level of learning support, they can be moved to another special education class that provides that same type of support. And it does not constitute a change in placement, and it protects the rights of both the bully and the victim. And before we talk about some other legally appropriate responses, I thought, Rachel, maybe we could just address a couple of the other questions that came in. So one of them was about bullying occurring on the bus. That is still bullying. And one of the positives is that most of the buses that I am in districts where I work have cameras on them. So usually if you reach out to the school soon enough, they can review the footage to document what happened. But all of the rights that your student has in school follow them onto the bus. So everything that we're talking about happening in school also pertains to transportation. A lot of times bus drivers are overlooked as staff that may need training on a student's IEP, and that can be something that you specifically request. You can ask that the bus aide, if there is one, has training. You can ask that there be a bus aide if there isn't one. So those are all appropriate responses to propose as you work through a bullying situation that's happening on a bus. There was another question about whether one act of bullying is enough to lead to requesting compensatory education. And it really depends. You know, in our cases, we will sometimes see one very severe act of bullying that then causes a student to be denied that right to a free, appropriate public education. Maybe it has caused them to be very anxious, to not be able to pay attention in class, to become school avoidant. And for all of those reasons, it may be enough to ask for compensatory education. But as we defined in the beginning, we are more frequently seeing bullying occur over multiple events. But sometimes it can be one kind of very significant event. And, you know, especially if the student is a student with more severe disabilities, that could make that one event more impactful. And then we also had a question about staff as bullies. And that is in some ways beyond what we were going to talk about here today, but it is something that comes up. And there absolutely is a power imbalance there. So if we're, thinking back to the original definition that we started with, it's negative actions, either of a severe degree or over, more frequently over like several interactions with a power imbalance, either real or perceived. And if there's staff, it's both real and perceived that this adult who is in a position of authority has a power imbalance. Unfortunately, it is something that we see. And so it's something that we will typically address if the student has an IEP through the IEP process. And depending on the severity of the actions, if it's a situation where it's hard to prove, but everybody has a sense that this teacher or aide or staff member just doesn't like this kid, doesn't treat them the same, then sometimes we can finesse it by saying that there's just not a good rapport established between the student and the staff. Rapport is very important to the student for learning, and we can sometimes tie that into the student's disability, and then we ask for a different staff member to be assigned. If it is something that we do have proof of, or it's conduct that is either rises to a criminal level or is sufficiently severe that we can point to laws that have been impacted by it, then sometimes we can pursue even other remedies than we pointed to here today. So like, unfortunately, we do sometimes represent families of students who have been physically assaulted in school by adult staff members. In those cases, we can sometimes get money damages, which, unlike compensatory education, don't have to be limited for educational purposes. They do have to go towards uses for the student, but they're very, it's, anything that the child may need, those funds can pay for. Before I move back to the slides, Rachel, is there anything I didn't cover, or any questions that we got that I missed?
There's one more question here, specific to a self-advocacy goal. The person is asking that, saying that she asked for a self-advocacy goal to be added because her child with an IEP was being bullied. The school responded that they wanted to do a reevaluation to determine if there was data to show the need for that. So she's wondering how much data is needed to demonstrate self-advocacy is needed.
Yeah, so, not knowing more about the situation, it's a little bit hard to say, but I would not typically think that we need a full reevaluation for that. I don't know about you, Rachel, but my suggestion might be to, I kind of have two thoughts. One would be to ask the district to add self-advocacy as a need while we take data to form a goal. So maybe we don't know specifically what the goal should say yet, because we don't know how often the student has incidents when they should self-advocate but don't. But at least let's add it as a need on the IEP, and then we can take data to write the goal. I don't think a full reevaluation is needed. And then the second part of my suggestion would be to ask the school to issue a prior written notice that says that you have asked for the self-advocacy goal, that they are declining to give a self-advocacy goal right now, and they're proposing instead to evaluate. Sometimes when they have to actually document that they are refusing something that the parent asked for, especially when it's something that seems very reasonable, it can nudge schools toward more compromise. What do you think, Rachel? Do you have any other suggestions? Or
I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. So turning back to the slides, we wanted to focus on some legally appropriate responses to the problems of bullying beyond what an IEP can contain, because an IEP is a legally appropriate response for sure. But there are other things that schools can do, even for students without IEPs, even for students who maybe have other rights that are being impacted, such as the ones that we talked about earlier today. So creating a school culture where everybody has a community responsibility for positivity, for watching out for bullying and for treating everyone with dignity and respect is important. Sometimes there are small interactions that don't rise to the level of bullying, but that are indicative of a lack of dignity and respect. And I think that the schools that I see that do a really good job with addressing bullying address those small instances as well before they become big instances, and teach everyone that they have a responsibility to prevent bullying. We also think about the power of the bystander. Most students don't like to see bullying happen, but they don't know how to respond when it does. So teaching kids to be, my daughter's school calls it to be an upstander. So you're standing up for kids and teaching them how to stand up for kids, and also making them feel that they'll be protected if they do stand up for a student who's being bullied, that others will have their back, that other students will have their back, that the teachers will have their back, that it's something that the adults in the building take seriously, and that everyone should be treated with respect. So peer advocacy is a specific strategy that can be taught to students, and it can be very powerful. And there are two reasons listed here for why it works. So first of all, students are more likely than adults to see what's happening and to observe bullying. I have often seen situations where students report the bullying to adults, and then that's how it's learned that one of our clients was being bullied, is because other classmates brought it to the attention of the adults in the building. And then second, a student telling somebody to stop bullying is just going to have oftentimes a more significant impact than an adult giving the same advice. And it's true from like brushing your teeth at a sleepover party all the way to more major instances as bullying. So for those reasons, teaching peer advocacy as part of your larger school curriculum can be a really valuable tool.
Teaching self-advocacy is another really valuable tool, especially when combating bullying. So, and this has already come up a couple times today, and this is something that can be addressed throughout the IEP process. But self-advocacy is really important because it means that the student is responsible for telling people what they want and need in a straightforward way. Students need to be involved in the steps taken to address a bullying situation. So this is really key if a student's being bullied but doesn't know how to tell someone, to tell the teacher, tell the parents, tell other students. It's important for students to learn the tools so that they can advocate for themselves to try to prevent future bullying from taking place. So some examples of self-advocacy is knowing how to speak up for yourself, to describe your strengths, disability, needs, and wishes, to take responsibility for yourself, to learn about your rights, to obtain help or know who to ask if you have a question. So this can be addressed through the IEP in ways that we've recently discussed, whether it's adding a goal to the IEP to work on self-advocacy skills, adding needs, adding services, addressing it through counseling so that students can know how to handle, how to speak up for themselves and hopefully try to prevent bullying from taking place.
This kind of goes back to what I was talking about with legally appropriate responses, but having set school policies in place is another piece of the puzzle to addressing bullying. So Rachel talked earlier about how Delaware law actually requires school policies, and in every state, schools should have policies to address bullying, whether it's legally required or not. So first of all, there should be really clear roles for school personnel to follow. And we actually got a question about what happens when an adult is advised of bullying and nothing happens. And to me, that is cause for escalation, because in this circumstance, the staff is on notice that bullying is occurring and they should be responding. And part of that might be that the staff doesn't know what role they need to play, what the steps are. But typically at that point, I would, as a parent, document the concern by emailing sometimes I start with the staff person, sometimes I start with their superior, depending on the level of the staff person. So if it's an aide, a lot of times the parent might not have actually direct communication with that person. It might be the teacher that they have communication with. But, contacting their point of contact and saying, This issue came to my attention. I'd like to understand why the reaction was what it was. I'm very concerned about my child's well-being and appreciate your partnership, and kind of starting off by keeping it somewhat neutral. But then if you're not getting the responses that you like, escalating and taking it up the food chain, by which I mean responding to that email and copying the next person in the hierarchy up until you are getting some responses that are actually proactive or, addressing the problem. School policy should also establish a committee that determines the specific needs of the school and then is able to respond to those needs as they change. And so it may involve in-services every year. It might involve stepping in when there's a specific problem or classroom that is an issue. And then the purpose of the policy should be to protect all people in the school, students, staff, and the educational environment, and to send a message that bullying is prohibited. And going back to one of those prior slides, to really establish that the school is a place of where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. There should be specific definitions of bullying and harassment in your school policy, such that a parent can look to the policy and see if what is occurring arises to the level of bullying. There should also be graduated consequences for bullying that are spelled out and that are clear, and then those consequences should be actually implemented consistently. There should be procedures for investigating bullying, and a clear statement that students will be disciplined if bullying disrupts the educational environment. And that goes back to those consequences and implementing them consistently. And then there should be procedures in place and curriculum in place for educating students on bullying, and also for training teachers and staff, and also educating parents about their rights and about how to raise concerns if bullying occurs. The policy also has to address cyberbullying, because we know that we live in a world where at a certain age, students have cell phones, they have access to computers. This says that it should address bullying while on campus. And then the next bullet says address bullying off campus. I think addressing all cyberbullying is particularly important because it bleeds over. So a student will say something on social media at home, and then the next day that's distracting the student in school. Schools just need to be aware of the legal standards in their state when crafting off-campus policy, but it does impact students in school, and so it should speak to the impact of off-campus bullying.
Another policy, and this is particularly related to cyberbullying and bullying related to the internet, is instituting a general internet safety or bullying curriculum. So a perpetrator's bullying behavior, as we've been talking about, doesn't exist in isolation. It may indicate the beginning of a generally antisocial and rule-breaking behavior pattern that can extend into adulthood. So programs to address the problem, therefore, must reduce opportunities and rewards for bullying behavior. So one way and that comes from a bullying prevention program. But one way that schools can do this is to institute a general internet safety or bullying curriculum. So another way to address the problem, as we've kind of been discussing, is to teach basic internet protection strategies. And this is something that can be done at school and also can be done at home with your students. So some ways to do this is to block a sender of an IM or text messaging, to log off the computer and spend time letting a situation cool down. If you see your child engaging in this type of activity online, or to talk to them about doing that, even if it's not in your presence. And another way to address this is to encourage not responding to hurtful messages. Another way to address this is establishing a mentoring program. This can be at school. There are mentoring programs that are put in place like this. Also, there are plenty of programs outside of school that do things like this, where you pair older students with younger students. Another way, as we've been talking about all day, is to build this safe environment, establishing a school culture of acceptance, tolerance, and respect. You can address the problem by assessing bullying in your school and educating students and school staff through all the ways that we've discussed today.
And
Another
then,
one-
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
okay.
I couldn't remember if this was mine or yours.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Another way to address this via policies is monitoring at-risk students for being bullied. So kids who are at a higher risk have poor social skills and other noteworthy attributes such as learning disabilities, obesity, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and autism spectrum disorder. So if you, it's important for schools and for you to monitor students who have these different at-risk qualities, because it could be a helpful way to address bullying before it gets too aggressive.
I'm going to just take a quick pause to address a couple more questions. So someone asked about learning about the consequences for the bully. So often you're not actually able to learn the specific consequences of the bully, but you are allowed to know as it pertains to your child. So for example, if the student has been moved to a different classroom, then you are able to be told that the student's no longer in your child's class. And just not have the specifics of what the discipline was. And then, what to do when a child is bullied and it's reported and the school says that they don't recognize it as bullying. So that's why I do find it to be really important that the school's policy define bullying. And then I would go back to documenting as much as you can and sending an email that explains why the behavior that you saw is meeting the definition of bullying in the school policy. If it happened multiple times and the school says that they only saw it once, you can give reasons why you understand that it happened multiple times and ask them to reopen their investigation. And then you can also, many states have a bullying ombudsperson. So you can reach out to that office and see if they are able to investigate the bullying as an outside perspective, if your state has that. So a few signs that a child is being bullied, things to watch out for. So if a student has unexplainable injuries, then that is obviously a sign of potential physical bullying. Lost or destroyed clothing, books, electronics, or jewelry. Think about the kind of like old cartoon comic bully of give me your lunch money. That's the kind of thing that you can watch out for in terms of actual manifestations. Frequent headaches or stomach aches is one to be aware of. If a student kind of has a sudden uptick in those types of illnesses, then it can be indicative of them really believing that they're sick or really being so afraid that they don't want to go to school and that they know that this is the way that they can avoid going. So stress can cause physical manifestations like headaches or stomach aches. And also students know that if they're sick, that might allow them to stay out of school. So those are things to be on the lookout for. And then changes in eating habits often accompany anxiety, and that can be an indication that a student is being bullied. Another kind of example of the lunch money scenario is if a kid didn't eat lunch, either because the bully took it or because they were too nervous, then that child might be coming home from school hungry, and that's something to watch out for. Difficulty sleeping is another red flag for potentially being bullied, because that anxiety can come in the night, frequent nightmares. A decline in interest in school, either through poor grades or not wanting to go to school can be an indication. A sudden loss of friends or a student who all of a sudden doesn't want to hang out with their friends anymore can be an indication that peer group has become a negative one. And then feelings of helplessness and low self-esteem can be an indication of bullying. Self-destructive behaviors such as running away, harming themselves, or talking about suicide can all be calls for help from a student who's being bullied. And then just remembering, why kids don't ask for help because they are embarrassed or the bully has threatened them or they feel an imbalance of power. These are all reasons that a student or child might not ask for help. And so that's why it's so important for us as the adults in their lives to be on the lookout. And I'm just going to kind of hop over some of these slides for time's sake, and so that we can get to a few questions, but making sure that your child feels that they're not alone. And this final slide here, contacting your school, taking some of the steps that we talked about today can be really helpful in mitigating the problems of bullying. Rachel, was there anything else you wanted to add? I know I just kind of rushed through the end there.
No, I don't think so. I think it's just really, it's great that you've all, listened into this presentation and are getting, it's a really complicated system, and it's confusing and overwhelming. And obviously, if your child is experiencing bullying, that can be an overwhelming process. So it's really important to know your rights and your child's rights and what to do. And of course, if anybody has questions, you can reach out to us at any time. Or if you have questions now, feel free to add them to the feed.
Yeah, we're happy to stay on for a few minutes and check the Q&A. There was a question that was put in here about what to do when the school refuses to open an investigation. And I would go back to that suggestion that I made earlier about the self-advocacy goal, which is if you do have a student with a disability with an IEP, to ask that they issue a prior written notice to say, I would like an investigation done. And if you're going to reject it, I would like you to put that in writing. Because sometimes that can be helpful. But also, as Rachel said, we are available and our office does free consultations. So if you or a family is concerned about bullying of your child, feel free to reach out to our office at the phone number on this slide, and we can talk with you about reviewing some records and doing a free consultation to see if there's anything that we can do to help. We don't like to hear about students being bullied, but we do want to help when a situation gets to a point where a family can't address it on their own. And I'm just looking at the Q&A now. And so we will stay on for a few moments if anybody wants to add a question here. But that concludes the bulk of our presentation, and I hope all of you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.